Jake Morrison sat at his communications station on the U's Vanguard and watched the stars through the small window next to his desk. At 19 years old, he was the youngest soldier on the ship, and everyone reminded him of this fact daily. The other crew members called him Rookie or Kid, but Jake did not mind because he knew he had something special that they did not have. He could understand alien languages faster than anyone else in the fleet. Captain Helen Burke walked past his station and nodded at him. She was a tough woman with gray hair and sharp eyes who had been fighting aliens for 20 years. Jake respected her more than anyone else on the ship because she was the first person to believe in his language skills. When the other officers wanted to put him in the kitchen or engine room, Captain Burke made him the communication specialist. The ship was on a routine patrol mission near the Kepler 442 system, and nothing exciting had happened for weeks. Jake spent most of his time listening to radio signals from distant planets and trying to decode their messages. He had learned parts of 12 different alien languages just by listening to their broadcasts. His notebooks were full of strange symbols and words that he had figured out on his own. Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez stopped by his station with a cup of coffee. Carlos was from Texas and had been in space for 10 years. He was one of the few people who treated Jake like a real soldier instead of a child. "Anything interesting out there, kid?" Carlos asked as he looked at Jake's screens. "Just the usual trade signals and weather reports," Jake replied. "But I picked up something strange about an hour ago." It was only for a few seconds, but the language pattern was different from anything I've heard before. Carlos raised an eyebrow. Different how? More complex. Like they were using multiple layers of meaning in single words. Most alien languages I have studied use simple direct communication, but this one seemed almost artistic. Before Carlos could respond, the ship's alarm started blaring. Red lights flashed throughout the bridge, and Captain Burke's voice came over the speakers. "All hands to battle stations. Unknown vessels approaching fast." Jake quickly switched his screens to long-range scanners and felt his heart race. Dozens of massive ships were appearing on the edge of the system. They were unlike anything in the human database. The ships looked like they were made of black metal with strange curves and spikes jutting out in all directions. "Those are big," Carlos whispered as he stared at the screen. "Captain." Burke hurried to the command center and started giving orders. "Communications, get me a channel to those ships. Weapons, prepare for defensive action only. Do not fire unless they fire first." Jake worked frantically at his station trying to establish contact with the alien fleet. His hands shook as he adjusted frequencies and sent standard greeting messages in 6 different alien languages. For several minutes, there was no response, and then suddenly his screen lit up with incoming signals. The alien language was the same complex pattern he had heard earlier, but now he could hear it clearly. The words seemed to dance and flow together in ways that human languages never did. Jake grabbed his notebook and started writing down everything he heard. "Captain, I am getting something," he called out. "The language is incredibly sophisticated. Give me a few minutes and I might be able to understand basic concepts." "Work fast, Morrison," Captain Burke replied. "Those ships are getting closer and they have not responded to any of our peaceful greetings." Jake listened carefully to the alien transmissions and began to see patterns. The aliens seemed to be discussing formations and strategies. He caught words that might mean leader or command or follow. His excitement grew as he realized he was actually understanding an alien language he had never studied before. "Captain, I think they are military," he said, "and I believe they have someone very important with them. Someone they keep referring to with a title that translates roughly to Supreme Ruler or Highest Commander." Suddenly, the lead alien ship fired a warning shot across the bow of the Vanguard. The blast shook the entire ship and sent Jake tumbling from his chair. When he got back up, his screen showed that the alien fleet had surrounded them completely. "So much for peaceful first contact," Carlos muttered. Captain Burke ordered all weapons powered up, but Jake could see on the scanners that they were hopelessly outnumbered. The alien ships were not only bigger than human vessels, but there were 50 of them against their single patrol ship. "Captain, wait," Jake shouted. "I'm picking up more transmissions." "I think they want to talk." The main screen in the bridge suddenly flickered to life, showing the interior of an alien ship. The bridge was enormous with high ceilings and walls covered in glowing symbols. At the center sat a figure that was clearly female despite being obviously alien. She was tall and elegant, with pale blue skin and silver hair that seemed to move on its own. Her eyes were large and completely black, and when she looked directly at the camera, Jake felt like she was staring right into his soul. "I am Queen Varith of the Zephyrian Empire," she said in perfect English. "You have entered our territory without permission." Captain Burke stepped forward. "I am Captain Helen Burke of the United Earthship Vanguard. We were conducting routine patrol operations and did not know this area was claimed territory. We apologize for any misunderstanding." The alien queen tilted her head slightly. "Misunderstanding? An interesting word. Tell me, Captain Burke, why should I not destroy your primitive vessel and continue with my mission? Because we pose no threat to your empire, your majesty. We are explorers, not conquerors. Perhaps we could establish peaceful relations between our peoples." Queen Varith smiled, but it was not a friendly expression. "Peaceful relations? How naive. Your species is young and weak. You have nothing we need or want." Jake watched the exchange and felt his stomach sink. The Queen seemed determined to view humans as inferior, and Captain Burke's diplomatic words were not changing her mind. He studied the alien's expression and body language and noticed something that the others missed. Despite her harsh words, the Queen kept looking at different parts of their bridge as if she was curious about human technology and culture. "Prepare to be boarded," Queen Varith announced. "My soldiers will inspect your vessel and determine if your spies are merely fools." The transmission ended and Captain Burke turned to her crew. "All hands prepare for boarding. Weapons down, but stay alert. Morrison, keep monitoring their communications and let me know if you learn anything useful." Jake nodded and returned to his station. As he listened to the alien chatter, he realized that something very important was happening. This was not just a random encounter with a patrol fleet. Queen Varith herself was here, which meant something big was going on in this part of the galaxy. He just hoped they would live long enough to find out what it was. The alien soldiers who boarded the Vanguard were unlike anything Jake had ever seen. They stood nearly 8 feet tall and wore armor that seemed to be made of the same black metal as their ships. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, but Jake could see their glowing red eyes through the visors. They moved with perfect coordination and spoke to each other in short, clipped phrases that Jake was beginning to understand. Captain Burke and 12 other crew members were selected as prisoners, including Jake, Carlos, and Commander Lisa Grant, who was the ship's second in command. The aliens bound their hands with energy restraints that felt warm against the skin but would not break, no matter how hard someone pulled. Jake was surprised when one of the alien soldiers pointed directly at him and said something to his commander. The alien leader looked at Jake for a long moment and then spoke into his communication device. Jake caught enough words to understand that they were reporting about the young human who could understand their language, the transport to the alien flagship took only a few minutes, but Jake spent the entire time staring out the windows at the massive ship they were approaching. It was easily 10 times larger than any human vessel and covered with intricate designs that seemed to tell stories. The docking bay they entered was bigger than the entire Vanguard and filled with smaller ships that looked fast and deadly. "Stay close to me, Morrison," Captain Burke whispered as they were led through long corridors. "Whatever happens, do not volunteer any information." Jake nodded, but he was too amazed by what he was seeing to worry about interrogation techniques. The alien ship was like a floating city with corridors that stretched as far as he could see. The walls were covered with moving pictures that showed battles and ceremonies and portraits of important-looking aliens. Everything was designed to impress visitors with the power and glory of the Zephyrian Empire. They were brought to a massive chamber that Jake realized was the royal throne room. The ceiling was so high that it disappeared into shadows, and the walls were lined with hundreds of alien courtiers wearing elaborate robes and jewelry. At the far end of the room, on a raised platform, sat Queen Varith, on a throne that looked like it was carved from a single enormous crystal. The queen was even more impressive in person than she had been on the view screen. Her silver hair moved constantly as if it was alive, and her black eyes seemed to see everything at once. She wore robes that changed color as she moved, and a crown that looked like it was made of captured starlight. The human prisoners were forced to kneel in front of the throne while alien guards stood behind them with weapons ready. Jake tried to keep his head down, but he could not resist glancing up at the Queen. Every time he looked at her, she was already looking back at him. "So these are the humans who trespassed in our territory," Queen Virus said in her musical voice. "Tell me, prisoners, why should I not execute you as an example to your species?" Captain Burke lifted her head proudly. "Your Majesty, we are soldiers following orders. If you must punish someone, punish me alone." "My crew was just doing their duty," the Queen laughed, and the sound was like silver bells. "How noble. You would sacrifice yourself for your subordinates. This is admirable, but ultimately pointless. Your entire species will bow to the Zephyrian Empire eventually." Commander Grant spoke up next. "We represent the United Earth Fleet. Our government will negotiate for our release." "Will they?" the Queen asked with amusement. "And what could your primitive government possibly offer that would interest us?" Jake listened to the exchange and realized that the Queen was not really interested in the senior officers despite their attempts to take charge of the situation. Her attention kept returning to him, and he noticed that several of her advisors were also watching him carefully. One of them, a tall alien with elaborate facial tattoos, whispered something to the Queen that made her smile. "You there," Queen Virus said, suddenly pointing directly at Jake. "The young one." "Stand up." Jake felt his heart racing as he got to his feet. Captain Burke tried to object, but the alien guards pushed her back down. "What is your name, human?" the Queen asked. "Private Jake Morrison, Your Majesty," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Private Jake Morrison," the Queen repeated as if testing how the name sounded. "Tell me, Private Morrison, how is it that you understand our language?" Jake glanced at Captain Burke, who gave him a small nod. "I have always been good with languages, Your Majesty. I study radio transmissions and try to learn how different species communicate." "Interesting," the Queen said as she stood up from her throne. "And what have you learned about Zephyrian communication?" Jake took a deep breath and decided to be honest. "Your language is the most complex I have ever encountered, Your Majesty. You use multiple layers of meaning in single words, and you can express emotions and concepts that human languages cannot even describe." "It is beautiful," the Queen's advisors murmured among themselves at this unexpected answer. Jake heard several of them use words that he thought meant surprised or impressed. Queen Virith walked down from her throne until she stood directly in front of Jake. He could smell a strange perfume that reminded him of flowers that did not exist on Earth. When she spoke, her voice was softer than before. "You find our language beautiful, Private Morrison. Most species we encounter consider it too difficult to learn. They prefer simple, direct communication." "Simple communication is useful for basic needs, Your Majesty," Jake replied. "But beautiful communication is what separates intelligent beings from animals. It allows us to share not just information, but feelings and dreams and hopes." The Queen stared at him for a long moment, and Jake wondered if he had said something wrong. Then she smiled, and it was completely different from her earlier cold expressions. This smile seemed genuine and almost friendly. "When did your species last produce art that moved the soul?" she asked. "When did you last hear music that made you weep with joy?" Jake was confused by the question, but he answered honestly. "I heard a symphony last month that made me think about my home on Earth. It made me sad and happy at the same time." "Yes," the Queen said with excitement, "that is what we have lost. That is what conquest and war have stolen from us. We have become so focused on expanding our empire that we forgot why empires should exist in the first place." Her advisors looked worried at this declaration, but the Queen ignored them. She walked in a circle around Jake, studying him from every angle. "You are young," she said. "Your mind is not yet hardened by years of war and politics. You still see beauty where others see only obstacles. You still ask questions instead of assuming you already know all the answers." The alien with facial tattoos stepped forward and spoke urgently to the Queen in rapid Zephyrian. Jake caught words that meant dangerous and unwise and mistake. "Queen, Violet H held up her hand for silence and then turned back to face the human prisoners. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly throughout the enormous throne room. "I have made a decision," she announced. "This young human possesses something my empire desperately needs: fresh perspective, genuine curiosity, the ability to see beauty in complexity rather than fear it. He will remain here and learn our ways. He will become part of my court." Captain Burke jumped to her feet despite the guards' weapons. "Your Majesty, you cannot simply kidnap one of my soldiers." "I am not kidnapping anyone, Captain Burke," the Queen replied calmly. "I am offering Private Morrison an opportunity to bridge two civilizations. He can learn from us and teach us about humanity." "It is a great honor." Jake felt like the entire room was spinning around him. "Your Majesty, I appreciate the offer, but I have duties to my ship and my captain." Queen Virith smiled at him again. "Your duties will be to me now, Private Morrison. You will have teachers and guides and access to knowledge that no human has ever possessed. In return, you will help me understand why my empire faces rebellion and unrest, despite our superior technology and military might." She turned to address Captain Burke and the other prisoners. "The rest of you will be returned to your ship unharmed. You will tell your superiors that the Zephyrian Empire is willing to consider peaceful contact with humanity, but only if they prove worthy of our attention, and if Private Morrison refuses to cooperate." Captain Burke asked with steel in her voice. The Queen's expression hardened. "Then you will all remain here as prisoners until you learn proper respect for Zephyrian authority." Jake realized that he was being asked to sacrifice his freedom to save his friends. He looked at Captain Burke and saw the worry in her eyes. He looked at Carlos, who gave him an encouraging nod. He looked at Commander Grant, who seemed to be trying to communicate something important with her expression. "I will stay, Your Majesty," Jake said quietly. "But I want your word that my crewmates will be released safely." "You have my word, Private Morrison," Queen Virith replied. "Welcome to the Zephyrian Empire." Jake's new quarters were larger than his entire childhood bedroom back on Earth. The walls were made of some kind of translucent material that changed color based on his mood, and the furniture seemed to adjust itself to his body automatically. A large window showed the vast expanse of space with alien stars that he did not recognize. He had been given clothing that looked similar to what the lower-ranking Zephyrian courtiers wore, but in colors that marked him as a guest rather than a citizen. Lord Catherine arrived shortly after Jake had settled into his room. The tall alien with facial tattoos had been assigned as Jake's cultural advisor, and it was clear from his expression that he was not happy about this duty. His tattoos seemed to shift and change as he spoke, which Jake realized was a form of emotional communication. Among the Zephyrian nobility, "Human," Catherine said in heavily accented English, "you will learn our ways quickly, or you will find life here very difficult. The Queen may be fascinated by your primitive perspective, but the rest of us are not so easily impressed." Jake stood up respectfully. "I understand, Lord Catherine. I am grateful for the opportunity to learn about your culture." "Grateful," Catherine repeated with amusement. "We shall see how grateful you remain after a few weeks of proper education. Your first lesson begins now. In Zephyrian society, everything is based on hierarchy and respect. You are currently at the very bottom of that hierarchy despite the Queen's interest in you." Over the following days, Jake threw himself into learning everything he could about Zephyrian society. The aliens had ruled over dozens of star systems for thousands of years, and their culture was incredibly complex. Every gesture had meaning, and every conversation followed strict rules about who could speak, when, and how they could address different ranks of people. Jake discovered that the Zephyrian Empire was not as stable as it appeared from the outside. Lord Catherine let slip during one of their lessons that several colony worlds had been experiencing unrest, and that trade revenues were declining in many sectors. The military was stretched thin trying to maintain control over such a vast territory, and the cost of constant warfare was draining the Empire's resources. Why does the Empire keep expanding if it is becoming harder to control? Jake asked during one of their history lessons. Catherine's tattoos darkened with what Jake had learned was disapproval. "Because that is what we have always done, human. Conquest brings glory and resources. It is the Zephyrian way. But what if the resources spent on conquest were used to improve the worlds you already control? Jake suggested. Happy citizens are more productive than conquered ones. Happy citizens, Catherine scoffed. Citizens exist to serve the Empire, not the other way around. Your human concepts of individual happiness are weakness. Despite his harsh words, Jake noticed that Catherine seemed genuinely interested in these discussions. The alien would often ask follow-up questions or challenge Jake to explain human social structures in more detail. Jake began to suspect that even the Queen's advisors were not entirely satisfied with the way their empire was being run. Queen Virith summoned Jake to private meetings twice a week in her personal study. The room was filled with books and artifacts from dozens of different worlds, and Jake spent hours examining items that represented civilizations he had never heard of. The Queen seemed to enjoy watching him explore and often asked what he thought about various pieces of art or technology. This sculpture is from the Altarian Confederacy, she explained during one visit as Jake studied a twisted metal figure. They were master artists before we conquered them 50 years ago. Now they make weapons and ships for our military instead of creating beauty. What happened to their artists? Jake asked. They were relocated to more practical occupations, the Queen replied. Art does not contribute to military strength. Jake looked at the sculpture more carefully. Despite being made of metal, it seemed to flow like water, and when he moved around it, the light created different patterns that told a story about joy and sorrow. Your Majesty, if I may ask a question, Jake sighed carefully. You may always ask questions in my presence, Jake Morrison. That is why you are here. Do you miss the art and music that your own people used to create? The Queen was quiet for a long time, and Jake worried that he had crossed a line. When she finally spoke, her voice was very soft. I have recordings of Zephyrian symphonies from before we began our expansion. Music that could make the listener feel like they were flying among the stars or swimming in oceans of light. We have not produced anything so beautiful in 300 years. Why not, Your Majesty? Because beautiful things are fragile, Jake Morrison. They require peace and safety and time to grow. War destroys such luxuries. But war also brings power and resources that keep us alive in a dangerous galaxy. Jake spent several weeks thinking about this conversation. He began to understand that Queen Virith was caught between her desire to preserve Zephyrian culture and her need to maintain the empire that supported billions of her people. Every decision she made had consequences that affected entire star systems. His breakthrough came during a crisis with the Altarian Confederacy. The former artists turned weapons manufacturers had gone on strike, demanding better working conditions and the right to create art during their free time. The Zephyrian military wanted to respond with force, but Queen Virith asked for Jake's opinion before making a decision. What would happen if you gave them what they want, Your Majesty? Jake asked. Production would decrease, Lord Catherine interjected. Other conquered peoples would demand similar concessions. The empire would appear weak. But what if production actually increased because the workers were happier? Jake suggested. What if allowing them to create art made them more creative? In their weapons design as well. Queen Virith raised an eyebrow. Explain this theory. Jake took a deep breath. On Earth we have found that people work better when they feel valued and fulfilled. If the Altarians could spend part of their time creating art, they might put more effort into their assigned work, because they would feel like partners rather than slaves. Ridiculous, Catherine declared. Conquered peoples must be kept under strict control or they will rebel. Are they not already rebelling by refusing to work? Jake pointed out. Perhaps strict control is what caused this problem in the first place. Queen Virith considered this for several minutes. Finally, she made a decision that surprised everyone, including Jake. We will try the humans' approach, she announced. The Altarians will be allowed to establish art studios and cultural centers. In return, they will maintain current production levels and provide innovative designs for our military equipment. Lord Catherine's tattoos turned almost black with shock, but he bowed and agreed to implement the Queen's orders. The results were better than anyone expected. Not only did the strike end immediately, but weapon production actually increased as the Altarians began incorporating artistic principles into their engineering. Other conquered worlds heard about the new policy and several of them requested similar arrangements. Your human perspective has achieved something our military could not, Queen Virith told Jake during their next meeting. You have turned potential rebels into willing partners. I am beginning to understand why your species has survived, despite being so young and technologically inferior. Jake felt proud of this success, but he also realized that he was changing in ways he had not expected. Living among the Zephyrians was teaching him to think on a much larger scale than he ever had before. Decisions that affected millions of people required a different kind of wisdom than anything he had learned in his short life. He maintained secret contact with Captain Burke through methods that the Zephyrians did not monitor. She reported that the human fleet was working on both diplomatic and military solutions to secure his release, but Jake was no longer sure he wanted to be rescued. He was learning things that could prevent a war between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire. Be careful, Jake, Captain Burke warned during one of their communications. Do not let them change who you are. Remember that you are human first and their guest second, but Jake was beginning to wonder if being human first was the right approach, when the fate of entire civilizations hung in the balance. He was starting to think like Queen Virith thought, and that both excited and frightened him. The emergency alarms woke Jake from a deep sleep and sent him running to his window. In the distance, he could see explosions of light as Zephyrian ships engaged unknown attackers. Lord Kethrin burst into his quarters without ceremony, and his tattoos were swirling with patterns that Jake had learned meant extreme agitation. Get dressed, human, Kethrin commanded. The Queen requires your presence immediately. We are under attack. Jake quickly put on his formal court robes and followed Kethrin through corridors filled with rushing aliens. Everyone seemed to know exactly what they were supposed to be doing except for Jake, who felt lost and confused. When they reached the command center, he saw Queen Virith standing before a massive tactical display showing the battle in real time. Jake? Morrison, she called when she saw him enter. I need your human perspective on this crisis. We are facing a coordinated rebellion across 7 star systems. Ships we do not recognize are attacking our installations and supporting the rebel forces. Jake studied the tactical display and felt his heart sink. The unknown ships used weapon signatures that looked familiar, but he hoped he was wrong about what he was seeing. Your Majesty, may I examine the communication intercepts from the rebel forces? He asked. Queen Virith gestured to a nearby console, and Jake spent several minutes listening to the rebel transmissions. His worst fears were confirmed when he heard human voices mixed in with the alien languages. Some of the rebellion was being supported by his own species. General Vekmor, the Empire's top military commander, was arguing with the Queen about response options. His forearms gestured dramatically as he spoke, and his crest flared with anger. Your Majesty, we must crush this rebellion immediately and completely, he declared. Every day we delay gives them time to recruit more supporters and acquire more weapons. And where are they getting these weapons? General Queen Virith asked coldly. Our intelligence suggests that someone is supplying them with advanced technology. Jake cleared his throat nervously. Your Majesty, I believe some of the support is coming from human sources. The command center fell silent and everyone turned to stare at Jake. Lord Kethrin's tattoos turned completely white, which Jake had learned was a sign of shock or betrayal. Explain. Queen Virith said in a dangerous voice. I recognize some of the weapon signatures and communication protocols, Your Majesty. They match human military technology. I believe my people are secretly supporting the rebellion because they see it as a way to weaken the Zephyrian Empire before it can threaten Earth. General Vekmor's crest flared even brighter. Then this human is a spy, Your Majesty. He has been feeding information to his people about our defenses and capabilities. No, Jake said quickly. I've had no contact with human military forces except for the messages I send to Captain Burke, and those communications are monitored by your security systems. Queen Virith walked slowly around Jake while everyone watched. If what you say Is true, then your species has betrayed the trust I showed by releasing your crewmates peacefully. They are using my mercy against me. Jake felt trapped between his loyalty to humanity and his growing respect for Queen Virate H. Your Majesty, I believe my people are acting out of fear, not malice. They do not understand that you are trying to reform the Empire. They only see a powerful military force that could threaten their worlds. Fear, General Vekmar spat. They will learn what fear truly means when I turn their worlds to ash. General, you will take no action against human territories without my direct order. Queen Virith commanded. Jake Morrison has proven his value to this empire, and I will not have his species destroyed because of political miscalculations. The argument continued for hours as reports came in from across the empire. The rebellion was larger and better organized than anyone had expected. 12 different species were participating, and they had coordinated their attacks to hit the most important Zephyrian military installations simultaneously. Jake listened to the tactical discussions and realized that Queen Virith faced an impossible choice. If she responded with overwhelming force, she would prove that her reform efforts were meaningless and probably create even more rebellions. But if she showed weakness, the current rebellion might spread until it destroyed the Empire completely. Your Majesty, Jake said during a brief pause in the arguments. What if there was a third option? Speak, the Queen commanded. What if instead of crushing the rebellion or surrendering to it, you offered the rebel worlds genuine independence in exchange for a defensive alliance? They could govern themselves but remain part of a larger federation for mutual protection, General. Vekmar laughed harshly. A federation, Your Majesty. This human wants you to give up your empire and become a mere coordinator of equals. The empire is already falling apart, General, Jake pointed out. The rebellions prove that conquest and control are no longer working. But cooperation and mutual benefit could create something stronger and more stable. Queen Virith stared at the tactical display for a long time. You're asking me to abandon 3,000 years of Zephyrian tradition, Jake Morrison. You want me to transform from an empress into something that has no name in our language. Your Majesty, you told me that your people once created beautiful music and art. What if a federation of free worlds could create even more beautiful things together than any empire could create through conquest? Lord Catherine spoke up unexpectedly. The human may have a point, Your Majesty. Our current system requires enormous resources to maintain control over unwilling subjects. A voluntary alliance would eliminate most of those costs. It would also eliminate most of our power, General Vekmar argued. How could we defend ourselves against other empires if we gave up our military advantages? How can we defend ourselves now if half our military is tied up fighting rebellions? Jake countered. A federation of allies would have more combined strength than an empire of slaves. Queen Virate H raised her hand for silence. Even if I agreed to this radical proposal, how could we implement it? The rebel leaders will never trust any offer coming from me. Jake took a deep breath before making the most dangerous suggestion of his life. Your Majesty, let me go to them as your representative. As a human, I might be able to convince them that your offer is genuine. And as someone who has lived in your court, I can explain how much the Empire has already changed. The command center erupted in protests from every direction. General Vekmar called Jake a traitor, and Lord Catherine insisted that the plan was suicide. Several other advisors argued that sending a human to negotiate would make the Empire look desperately weak. Queen Virith listened to all the objections and then looked directly at Jake. You would risk your life for an empire that is not even your own? Why? Because, Your Majesty, I believe that what we create together could be better than anything our species could build separately. And because I have come to care about the Zephyrian people almost as much as I care about humanity. Almost as much, she repeated with a slight smile. Your honesty is refreshing, Jake Morrison. Most courtiers would claim to love the Empire more than their own lives. I cannot lie to you, Your Majesty. I am human, and I always will be. But I am also something new now. Someone who belongs to both worlds and can maybe build bridges between them. Queen Virith made her decision with the same suddenness that had characterized all her choices since Jake had known her. You will go to the rebel leaders with an offer of complete autonomy in exchange for a defensive alliance. Lord Catherine will accompany you as proof that this offer comes from me personally. General Thekmore will prepare our forces for either peace negotiations or total war, depending on how the rebels respond. General Thekmore's crest flared one final time. And if this mad plan fails, Your Majesty? If they kill your human ambassador and attack us anyway, Queen? Virith's expression hardened into something that reminded Jake why she had conquered so many worlds. Then, General Thekmore, you will have the total war you seem to want so badly. But if Jake Morrison succeeds in preventing that war, you will adapt to the new reality or find yourself commanding a supply depot on the edge of nowhere. As Jake prepared for the most important mission of his life, he wondered if he was about to save two civilizations or destroy them both. Either way, there would be no going back to the simple life of a young communications specialist on a human patrol ship. The rebel base was hidden inside a massive asteroid in the Vega system, and Jake felt his stomach twist with nervousness as their small diplomatic ship approached the docking bay. Lord Catherine sat beside him, reviewing the terms of Queen Virith's offer one final time. The alien's tattoos showed patterns that Jake had learned meant determination mixed with fear. "Remember, human," Catherine said quietly. "If this negotiation fails, we will both likely die here. The rebels have no reason to trust either of us." Jake nodded and checked his translation device one more time. He would be speaking to representatives from 12 different species, and he needed to make sure his words carried the right meaning in all their languages. The docking bay was smaller than he had expected and filled with ships from various rebel worlds. Jake recognized Altarian vessels, alongside craft from species he had only read about in Zephyrian databases. Armed guards surrounded their ship the moment they landed, but Jake was relieved to see that the weapons were not immediately pointed at them. A tall humanoid alien with blue skin and 6 arms approached their ship. Jake remembered from his studies that this was likely